Hey guys, what's up? It's Al Kendor. So I haven't made a video in a while, just mostly because I've been traveling quite a bit, and this is what the topic of this video is. It's about my exchange to the University of Leeds in Leeds, United Kingdom last semester. So ever since I was in grade 12 and I knew of somebody in university who has been doing an exchange, I've always wanted to do an exchange because I've always wanted to be able to travel and see a different city, different country, and different continent, if anything. And I had that in the back of my mind ever since I got accepted into university, and I knew I really wanted to do something in my second, third, or fourth year of my university experience. I think it really came up to me probably during the end of first year or the beginning of my second year. That was when I was starting to make up my mind, like, oh, do I want to go on exchange? Is that what I really want to do? Is that what I want to pursue? And after going through attending a couple sessions and talking to different people, watching an abundant amount of YouTube videos, I decided, okay, like this is something I really want to do. I want to pursue it. I want to study abroad for one semester. At that point, I haven't fully decided where I wanted to go yet. I wasn't specifically set on the University of Leeds. I was just more so set on the UK. And usually people who are, from the Commonwealth countries are more likely to choose the United Kingdom or choose Australia or choose Canada to study abroad, or even the US, just because they speak English, so it might be a little bit easier to get around for some people. I wanted to do Europe, and that's something I limited down to. It's either Europe or Asia. Those are the two kind of like continents I really wanted to visit. My first choice was the University of Leeds, and my second choice was National University of Singapore. They were each on different continents. Had I not have gotten accepted into the University of Leeds, I probably would have been in Singapore. Could have chosen, University of York, just kind of a couple of different, universities around the United Kingdom. However, I decided on Leeds mostly on the fact that my cousin was there, so I was like, okay, I knew someone I knew, and I also had a high school friend that was considering the same university. So we just kind of decided, okay, that's probably the top choice that I want to go to. It offered courses that kind of like related to my field of study, which is environmental science. So I decided, okay, let's just do Leeds. Or if I don't get accepted to it, then I'll choose the National University of Singapore. Secondly, the reason why I chose the United Kingdom, I thought about the fact that I would probably be traveling when I am in Asia or if I was in Europe, and I knew that I'd probably be traveling on the weekends or throughout the month. Europe was one of those continents that were way more compact comparatively speaking to like the US. It was a lot easier for me to fly anywhere and between different places. A lot of flights going all different directions in Europe, which made everything easier, and most importantly, they were cheap flights, which is one of the main reasons why I chose Europe as my top number one choice on the list. Had I had a choice, I probably would have wanted to do France or Germany, and the main reason for that was because it spoke a different language, and that's kind of something that I felt like would have been a little bit more challenging, a little bit more fun for me, and it might immerse myself in a different kind of experience than, let's just say, the United Kingdom. I'm not saying the United Kingdom had any issues, obviously, but just something different for me. So if you're considering a different kind of environment, or you want something to feel super, super different, you might want to go to a country that doesn't speak the language that you speak or that you know how to speak, or maybe a language that you might want to be learning, and maybe you can consider going to one of those countries that might speak that language. So the things that I packed that I didn't really end up using was having a lot of different outfits specifically for me. I packed a lot of extra clothes expecting to use it. I brought a lot of, I brought one or two extra pairs of shoes that I thought I would need, and I never really ended up wearing them as much. What I would say when you start packing for exchange is that to limit down the amount of clothes that you get. One thing that most of us really sometimes tend to forget is that when you do get abroad, you're more likely to buy something there, mostly because it's like a souvenir, but also because it's different and because it's Asian or it's European or it's Australian or it's just different from where you're from. So personally, I bought quite a bit of clothes from Europe. So I think clothing is one of those things that you don't have to bring so much of, and I felt like I overpacked in that sense. Otherwise, I think that was one of the biggest things that I brought a little bit too much of. I only brought one suitcase over, but I brought two suitcases back. Recommend you to bring as little as you can over, but obviously what you need, bring it over and try to do it in one suitcase. And then when you come back, all your souvenirs, all your new stuff you bought, you can put that in your second suitcase and then bring two suitcases back. Scared because I don't know what to expect. I don't know how things would be like over there. I don't know how the people would be like over there. I don't know what kind of experience I might be experiencing. There might be a lot of different things that were coming my way that I had no idea would happen. That's kind of very normal for most people, most of us to be scared. just to be away from, you know, something you're comfortable with. And that's what I kind of also liked as well, is kind of like that challenge. I really love traveling, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. Traveling and photographing stuff while I'm traveling, and shooting films when I'm traveling, or just even vlogs, something I enjoy dearly. This was kind of like a passion of mine as well, and I really wanted to do it. So I used this kind of like opportunity to travel, to see the world, to see Europe, given that I was living in an area that was so close to everything else. So what I mean by that is just like UK respectively to the rest of Europe, as opposed to flying over from Canada. And just being able to meet different people from all over the world was one thing I was also super excited about, because I feel like, you know, you kind of have a global connection now, which is kind of cool. If you get to travel to another country, for example, later on in your life, you get to, you know, meet up with people who are from that continent, from that country, from that city. So language specifically, like I mentioned before, since this is the UK, it wasn't really a big difference for me. They mostly spoke English, but obviously even with British English and Canadian English, there were certain words that were different, that were used differently, that I noticed when I was abroad. So that was a little bit different, but it wasn't like French versus English kind of different, where I was still able to understand everything relatively clearly. When it comes to academics, I think academically speaking, I found the UK easier in a sense. The fact that the UK didn't really have as many classes, and it didn't have as many assignments. Normally our courses are structured in the sense that we have a couple projects throughout the year, or 1 or 2 projects throughout the year, throughout the semester, sorry. And then you have a midterm in the middle of the semester, and then you have a final exam. With the UK, it was more so like I took courses where you would be writing one final exam with 100% of your mark, or you'd be writing one final exam that was worth 70% of your mark, and one report that was 30% of your mark. That's what constituted most of our mark in the UK. And with respect to classes, mostly on average, I'd say I had about 1 hour of class a week per class. So I only had about 6 to 7 hours of class a week. So I felt very laid back. I found it a lot easier comparatively to like classes here in Canada, where I would have maybe 15 hours a week as a normal, you know, kind of normal schedule for me. They took attendance, which was also very different than something like than what I'm used to experiencing here at Western. But in the UK, they pass around a sheet around most of my classes to take attendance. Apparently, if you were away for an X number of days, you might have to talk to somebody about it, or you might get like written up, or something happens, you get emailed regarding it. Well, I understand maybe the education system is just different, but that's something to consider if you're a kind of person to skip a lot of class. I lived on res in the UK, which was a little bit expensive. Sorry, not a little bit expensive, it was very expensive. But mine was also on meal plan. There were obviously options to have no meal plan and just live on a res and cook your own food. I just took the meal plan option because, you know, if I was lazy and I just decided I didn't want to cook, I could just go to the cafeteria and just get food. That was my kind of thinking and mindset prior to going to the UK, so that's why I chose the option. That doesn't mean you guys have to choose the same option. If you guys decide to choose University of Leeds or just going on exchange, you can live on an Airbnb. I knew people who lived in an Airbnb for 4 months, so that also works. There are obviously many different options for you to consider, but that was the option that you can consider for food. When it comes to food, the food in the UK is not significantly more expensive than in Canada. I'd say on average, a meal in the UK would probably cost around 10 quid. That was probably around the average price for most, like a dish of like pasta or something along the lines of like that. Obviously, it's not cheap, but it's not very expensive. It wasn't as expensive as I thought it would be, as I always perceived the UK to be something that's super expensive. Even with groceries, when I went to the grocery store, bread was cheaper than what we would find here in Canada, which was kind of a bit surprising to me. But that was kind of the subtle differences that I noticed with Leeds specifically. So as I mentioned, I didn't have a lot of classes, so I was a little bit half-half. I tried to find things to do, and then half of me would be, you know, sometimes hanging out with friends, talking to different people. For me, I spent kind of some time editing my videos or editing my photos from my previous travels that I just did. That was how I kind of spent some of my times. But there were some times where you were kind of in your room and you were a little bit lonely, just because everyone is in their own kind of like life and they're doing their own thing. But even here in Canada, here at Western, like that occasionally happens to me, and I'm sure it happens to most university students. Talking with the locals is different because I guess like they grew up in an environment that is different to ours. They're kind of still influenced by certain cultures that we might relate to. They have a different lifestyle, they talk differently, which I think was super unique and super cool. I didn't find it super difficult to fit in with the locals there in the UK. Majority of the people there were local. And I got along with them very well, and I really enjoyed talking with them and hanging out with them. What I do recommend for most of you who do go on exchange is just go out there and just be a social butterfly. Just try your best and just meet different people, talk to different people, because you do learn a lot about just the world and maybe just about life by talking and interacting with a lot of different people. To be when you are there in Leeds is just relatively similar to as a regular university experience. I didn't really find it difficult making friends there. I didn't really find it difficult, or very significantly different to Western here in Canada. So I guess for me, I didn't really experience that much of a drastic change. So one other thing about the daily life, when I was there, Brexit was kind of like the topic that everyone talked about. Weather was actually surprisingly a lot better than I expected. It wasn't as cold as I expected. I'd say it was about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in the winter, because I went during the winter term, and it didn't rain as much as I expected. I'd say it probably rained about 5 to 6 times a month, which to me is not a lot. I've always been told like the UK is relatively wet and rainy, but to me that was not the case. But maybe that was just my luck. I'd say it's probably 5 to 10 degrees is not very cold as a Canadian to me, but I guess depending where you're from, 5 to 10 degrees might be kind of cold. As a person coming from Canada with probably one of the most expensive cell phone plans in the world, I would definitely say when you get to the UK, you can buy yourself a cell phone plan there. For me, I bought a relatively cheap one. It cost me around 10 quid, 15 quid a month. It was not very expensive. I had around 3-4 gigabytes of data. Then I had like 300 minutes to call, 400 minutes, unlimited text. So for me, that did its job. I just got myself a UK number, and I just had it for around 5-6 months, and I just traveled everywhere with it. I'm not going to talk too much about my travels just because I can just spend 6 hours talking about it, and I don't think you want to watch 6 hours talking about my travels. I traveled 13 countries in total, including the UK. I traveled mostly throughout Western Europe. And for me, how I manage all my travels, most people probably would be asking, is I tried to design my schedule so I had Fridays off. So it make weekend trips a lot easier. You can fly out on a Thursday night and come back on a Sunday night if you wanted to go to Copenhagen, or if you want to go to like France, Paris, Spain, wherever you want to go. A weekend travel was not very difficult if you had Fridays off. The main one I did was in April, so they had like a whole month off to study for your exams, and that's what I did. I spent that month traveling and not studying for my exams. Not recommended, but that's just something I decided to do. And I spent 26 days just backpacking throughout Europe. I traveled 8 countries in that month, plus my other weekend trips that I did prior to in February and in March, and at the end of January. So because my exam schedule worked out for me, I had 10 days before my first exam. So obviously I spent 7 of those days traveling, and then I came back and started studying for my exams. That's what I did, because I took advantage of every day I had to travel. And then after my exams, I traveled for another 18 more days before I came back to Canada. So the things that I did, I don't necessarily recommend it to all of you. It depends on your, what you guys prefer. But I did a lot of overnight buses. I did backpacking, so I carried everything in one carry-on size bag. That allowed me to not pay for checked luggage, which saved quite a bit of money on flights. One other thing I also recommend is to live in hostels. Hostels are significantly cheaper. They costed me on hostels, I'd say on average, I spent around $30 Canadian per night on a hostel stay. Sometimes if my conditions work out, I would live in an Airbnb. I'd share with a couple friends, and that worked out as well. I hostel hopped quite a bit, so I went to almost every single city I lived in. I lived in a hostel somewhere down the line. I probably did 25 hostels, I think, throughout my whole semester abroad, so I had quite a bit of experience. You would go to hostelworld.com and just enter in a search of whatever city you want. Look at the reviews, and then kind of make a decision based on what reviews and what kind of what you're looking for. Make sure the distance is not too far from the city center. Make sure to look at the pictures to see how the hostels are like. For me personally speaking, all the hostels I lived in were relatively nice. I'd say get yourself a carry-on backpack and maybe a checked luggage if you want to, depending on how much stuff you have. For me and my couple friends and I, we bought ourselves an Osprey 4.40 carry-on backpack. That was kind of my backpacking bag. It's a nice bag because it's very utilitarian, and it's carry-on approved for almost all airlines. I even used it on Ryanair. It's a bit big for Ryanair according to the dimensions, but I used it on Ryanair and I didn't have a huge issue with it. But I did only fly Ryanair once, so I guess that was my experience with Ryanair. But I mostly flew EasyJet, or I went with like the more expensive flights like SAS when I went to Norway. I also recommend having packing cubes. Those are very, very, very useful. Packing cubes is a good way to arrange your outfits or something. So I bought myself Amazon ones for like $15-20, not very expensive. Highly recommend those as well. And I would recommend getting a waterproof bag. So a waterproof bag as in like a waterproof kind of like a cover to protect your backpack in case it gets soaked when you go hiking or when you go around the city and your umbrella doesn't do you enough justice. I'd say get one of those. They're just like a couple dollars, $5-6 for you to get a waterproof kind of cover for you to cover your backpack. So one other thing I do recommend when you guys do go traveling is to bring a camera. A camera is very, very important, I think, in my opinion. Probably one of the most important things that you probably can be bringing. Obviously, you don't have to bring a digital camera. You can be bringing, you know, just a phone with you around that has enough storage for you to take videos or take photos. Some of my favorite travel places and travel experiences that I managed to do when I was in Europe was definitely seeing the Northern Lights. That was an experience that I have to say is one of the coolest things I've ever done. Now, it wasn't like super, super mind-blowing or anything, but just being able to see the lights, just looking up in the sky and just seeing that green aurora just slowly moving is something that phenomenon just kind of amazes me even till this day. One other thing that I also got a chance to do is to see a lot of different sunrises in a lot of different cities, which was probably one of the best parts of the cities. That was also super cool because you get to have the whole place to yourself. You just get to experience it with Zen. My two favorite places I travel to was probably Tromsø, Norway, and Copenhagen, Denmark. They love the work-life balance kind of thing. That's, you know, really quite a bit of a thing for the people there. Well, I also really like the city's vibes, the city's color, the city's cultures, the city's experiences, the food, everything. However, those two cities are quite expensive, probably one of the more expensive cities I visited when I was in Europe. For me specifically, homesickness wasn't that big of an issue, just mostly because I went to Greece back in 2017, so 2 years ago. I volunteered as an English teacher in Athens, and I had a blast there. I mostly experienced the homesickness, most likely that volunteer experience. So when I went over to the UK and did my European exchange travel, I didn't really feel very homesick. That's because I was kind of used to it. I kind of already had the experience. I say the best thing for you to deal with homesickness is just, you know, to get out there and just kind of maybe talk to different people and interact with different people, locals, other exchange students, friends that you might make down the line when you're traveling or when you're on exchange. Talk to those people, get to really know them, learn, and just have some fun. And I think that will help you, you know, get over your homesickness a little bit better. It might not obviously fully allow you to get it over with, but it might definitely add to that experience and make your experience less homesick feeling. If you're gonna ask me specifically how much I spent, that's usually the biggest question that I get asked quite a bit. When it comes to absolute travels, I think I spent around $10,000 Canadian. I'm just gonna tell everything in Canadian because that's what my expense tracker has been keeping track of. That's how much everything costed with respect to that. My accommodation costed me around $7,000 Canadian, or around 4,000 pounds. And then the other expenses were probably like groceries, going out to eat, and my plane travel, my plane ticket from Toronto to London and London to Toronto. That probably cost me about $1,000. In total, I spent around $20,000 for my whole semester. That does not include the tuition that I paid for to Western, because I calculated as my expenses everything that I needed to pay for because of my exchange. For my April trip, my 26 days of travel, I spent around $4,200 Canadian. For my 18 days of travel in June, I spent around $4,000 Canadian. And on average, every weekend trip, I spent around $300 to $400 Canadian. So that's something for you guys to, you know, keep in mind if you guys are thinking of traveling. I applied to a lot of different scholarships and bursaries, and for me, I won about $10,000 worth of scholarships, so that really helped me with quite a bit of my exchange and my travel experiences. The other part of my savings came from me just working a full-time job in the summer. I just worked 4 months straight. I worked a minimum wage job, so to put in perspective, it's not as out of reach as it is for other people, or if you were to think it's very out of reach, it's not that bad. That basically accumulated to around 20 grand, so that paid off most of my travels and most of my experiences. My tuition I paid for with my student loans here. if you're considering exchange, do it. I'm a huge ambassador for exchange, and I think it's one of those experiences that I think is really worth doing. It's one of those experiences that you might not be able to get traveling when you're older, and some people will be like, oh no, but you can also backpack as well when you're older, and that part is true. Yes, that's 100% true. But to be able to live in Europe for 6 months, to be able to live in the UK for 6 months, to be able to live in a country you don't normally live in for 4 or 5, 6 months is not something you get to do quite as often or as easily later on in your life. So for me, that was one thing that, you know, I do highly recommend. It's different. You get to integrate yourself with a little bit, with the culture a little bit more, and you get to experience a little bit more unique things that you never thought you'd be able to experience. That's it for my video today. If you guys have any other questions, make sure to leave it down in the comments down below. I'm more than willing to answer your questions for you if you guys have any other questions. And if you guys don't, I hope you guys enjoyed my video. Thanks for sticking with me for the majority of the video. All I'm just gonna say is get out there, travel, enjoy the world, and live life. That's all I have for you guys today. So I will see you guys in my next video. Goodbye.